We open this meeting, and so be it. As we have said earlier, as we mentioned earlier, welcome everyone. It is amazing to be here with all of you. And as we share, as Kirsten shared with us another talk on the from the book Times of Health and Conscientiousness, chapter 3 of part 2 of the book, entitled Behavior and Conscience. Kirsten, please.
Good afternoon, evening, everyone. Daniel, I hit present.
No, no. Just share the PowerPoint. Just just share the PowerPoint.
So hit present.
No. Já tá. Just share the PowerPoint in the whole screen.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I mean, this just like, or do I share it in the StreamYard?
Oh, you do stop share over there? No, okay. Can you share the? No.
Share screen.
Yeah. Share screen. The entire screen. Yeah, click in the middle. Share again. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Perfect. I think you took it out.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna put this down a little bit because I'm not as tall as Leo. All 7 feet of him. I know, craziness. So don't be alarmed. This chapter is entitled Behavior and Conscience. We aren't going to be going into the nitty-gritty of the depths into what behavior is, where it stems from, etc., etc. We will touch what we would say at a high-level overview. This chapter probably merits much more consideration and time, but because this is only an hour, give or take, we do always encourage folks to go read the book. It is phenomenal. It is super informative and eye-opening. And to put it to you in a nutshell, Joanna starts out this chapter by talking about 3 different biotypes, which is not just a real fancy word that we're going to talk about, but it's just a fancy word to say these certain personality types. As a general whole, what we're going to talk about. Now, if you go into depth into the research, into literature, some of the words are slightly different, but Joanna does a good job of just summarizing it and putting it into 3 separate categories. And then she tells us, about these behaviors and where they come from. And at the end, she reminds us something that is pivotal and is of the utmost importance in our society, now, yesterday, tomorrow, and in the future. It is an area in our lives that has always been under attack from different areas, and that is the family unit. The family values, the family unit, coming together, working to raise children. Even society, in many ways, is working against us and against the family unit. So Joanna, in this chapter, reminds us of so many things. She also reminds us to put your cell phone on mute or vibrate. But it's the age-old question. Which came first, chicken or the egg? When we look at people and we talk about nature versus nurture, and some people might say, well, this, if we were to observe a criminal, for instance, some people might say, well, if they were to go back in their childhood. I recently saw an interview with this, I won't mention his name. It was a pretty famous criminal, his father, and he was detailing a little bit. I only watched a small snippet of this particular, and it was a very deviant criminal. It was very famous for doing very deviant things to people. His father was recanting stories from his childhood that were very disturbing from an outsider's perspective, really, I think for anyone's perspective. But when they interviewed the parents, and you see that they tried their best, they love their son, but nature versus nurture. He was born already with certain disturbing tendencies, and those tendencies, as he grew older and older, ended up corrupting a lot of his behavior. But ultimately, Joanna tells us in this book that it's the family group. That is where us as incarnate spirits, we have the opportunity as parents, as educators, as guardians, even as aunts and uncles. And that's a talk for a whole different other day, but let me do a quick sidebar. There is a book that's not here, but I have a picture of it in my PowerPoint, called Family Constellation. Not to be confused with the Family Constellations of Bert Hellinger. These are two different things. This one is by Joanna de Angelis, and she talks about, in every chapter of that book, the role in family and the extended role that teachers, how important it is to who we allow our children to be around, whether they are teachers, uncles, aunts, cousins, how all of those people will have an impression on our children, a lasting impression, especially during those early years. You know, most of us know them between birth and 7 or 8 years old, the most impressionable years. The family group. This is where, and we know this, that it's never by chance who we are incarnating in our families with. We know oftentimes in Spiritism, in the Spirits book, and throughout the Spiritist literature, we're reincarnating multiple times, sometimes in different roles, sometimes with the same mother, and we carry some of that memory with us, and it can complicate things. I mean, who hasn't had a difficult, who doesn't feel like they have had a somewhat of a challenging childhood for one reason or another? I think if we were to poll the vast majority of folks, most people would have some sort of bad experience or experience of struggle or some issue going on. But what is interesting is that we as human beings, we are social beings. Now, there's been a lot of research, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of it today. Very briefly, like I said, a high-level overview. But there's been a lot of research into the success of different families, different races. And they have found that children that are brought up in single-parent homes tend to have more struggles for different reasons. Now, if that, for many different reasons, if they have other support systems in place, they're able to do better. And by and large, not for whatever reason, research has shown that Latinos actually fare better. They do better than some of their African-American counterparts in similar situations. And in the research, in the world of research, they call this thing, they believe the reason why that is that within the Latino population, we have something called protective factors. What does that mean? Well, these scientists or researchers identified that within Latino culture, they tend to be more closer, tighter knit. They want to help one another more. There is this culture of like, oh, here's this person, let me help them. Just part of who the culture is. They call that protective factors, and that's why some of the research I'll show you, you'll notice the difference in that area when it comes to single family households. We bring this up because we ourselves were a single parent at one point in time. And no matter if you were a single parent or two parent or whatever kind of household you have, it's still true that it takes a village to raise children. It truly does. So sometimes we have extended family that we might be blessed with, grandparents, aunts and uncles, the SSB family, or your church, synagogue, or what have you. All important things. But I digress. This is one little tidbit. I'm going to read it and then explain it to you. But Joanna brings in this book, Family Constellation. Before I dive into the actual chapter, she says the following. Considered a now bear with me here, considered a psycho, social, spiritual animal, that's what we are. Humans cannot do without family life. Take note of that, okay? Humans cannot do without family life because the gregarious instinct, the instinct that we have inside of us as human beings, which commands its existence, induces the person to finding a group. Similarly to animals that live in families, protecting and preparing one another for independence. Why is this significant? Because when we have situations where children are growing up in broken homes, by our own nature, we look for family. So if we're not getting it at home, we find it somewhere else. That's why we had a huge prevalence of gangs or a lot of broken families, for lack of a better term, forgive me. You know, some of these people getting involved with drugs, drug dealers. Why? And a lot of the research that came out was that they felt a sense of family. They felt like, well, I didn't have a father, this is my father, or this is my mother. It was a sense of family that each one of us, every single human being, we desire it. We want it. It's within us to have that. So if we're not having that in our household, we look elsewhere because we are social beings. This is why this is interesting. This is why this is important. This is why for us to understand this, that this is innate in who we are. And this is from chapter 1 of Family Constellation. And we wanted to show this bit of research that I'm just going to read it here for you. The probability of family dissolution before age 12 by parents, marital status, and education. So here we have, let me get my little pointer. Can I use this? Oh, okay, gotcha. It won't show up on there. Okay, so the probability of family dissolution before age 12 by parents, marital status, and education. So it found that here we have couples that had high school or less. If they were born to cohabitating couples, the percent of the success of their family, born to married couple, and then we have some at some college and bachelor's degree. So here we have, high school or less, some who have college, and you can see the percentages. Born to cohabitating couple, had their bachelor's degree or more, born to a married couple. And we're going to share some more. And yes, you will note that the year here is 2006 to 2010. Don't worry, we have some later statistics. And you also can find a lot of statistics on the Bureau. Oh, I'm completely blanking on the name of it. I'll have to think of it later. It'll come to me. Which bureau it is, I'm completely blanking on it. In research, what they found is that if people followed a simple, what they called success sequence, and they had longitudinal studies where they followed participants that were born in the 80s, followed them all the way up until their adulthood. And if they had they did these three things, they could be successful, and it would determine, they could predict who would be successful or not, they found. One is what if they got at least their high school education, they worked full time, and were married before they had children. This is a quote from the research. Among millennials who followed this sequence, 97% are not poor when they reached adulthood. The link remained strong when this cohort of young Americans reached their mid-30s, according to a new IFS, which is the Institute of Family Studies, analysis of the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth. So they found that, I hope this doesn't get confusing. So those who did not do any of the three things, once they hit their 30s, 52% of them were impoverished. For those who at least graduated high school, only 27% of them were impoverished. If they had graduated with high school and had a full-time job, by the time they hit their 30s, only 10%. And if they had done all three, graduated high school, got a full-time job, and got married before they had children, less than 3% in this cohort, in this longitudinal study, which means they follow them over extended decades, about 3 decades. This is the data that they found consistently. And this was done in 2018. It's telling. It's telling because research has shown us, and Spiritism is telling us, and Joanna is sharing in this chapter, that the family is the cell of society. It is important, it is vital for us to do our best, to educate our children to the best of our knowledge. But let us go on. Joanna starts out the chapter in the following way. She says, careful studies of human behavior have shown that there are 3 biotypes of individuals in society: codependent, disgruntled, and well-adjusted. Codependent, as you might already understand by the name itself, she defines as made up of conditioned individuals, that is, those who set their goals according to circumstances other than their wishes. They do not experience the personal satisfaction that comes from striving for self-realization. Their aspirations are based on other people's possibilities, circumstances, and they claim they can only be happy if they are loved, if they take this trip or have that job, etc., etc., etc. Their lack of self-confidence disrupts their health. They are often susceptible to cancer, and they have a higher death rate than the other 2 biotypes. This is research-based. Joanna states this in the book, but if you go and you research about these different personality types, it has been proven. There is a higher incidence of cancer and other mental health issues related to stress, increased stress levels, etc., etc. Disgruntled. Those who are angry about life, those who are against it. They are unstable and irritable by nature, self-destructive, and live under the constant constriction of irascibility. They say they feel unfulfilled, that nothing goes right for them. Hence, they take it out on themselves, everyone, and everything else. They are easy prey for nervous disorders that chafe and make them more miserable, casting them into the dungeons of exaltation, depression, and direct or indirect suicide. And just as a side note or a disclaimer, this is not an attempt for any of us to sit here and begin to pass judgment on anybody. just meant for us to educate ourselves, reflect about ourselves, whether or not we have any of these, and how we can be better. Knowing that any time we have this unbalanced behavior or emotions that are not being worked through or working on healing or being controlled or under control, I should say, we are more likely and more susceptible to illnesses. We know that in science as a whole. When you have increased cortisol levels, increased stress levels, our immune system drops down and we're more susceptible to illness, to get the cold, to get a flu, to get what have you. So we know this to be true. This is nothing new. This is not a new breakthrough. This has been known for a good number of decades. Then Joanna, the only biotype that actually is something good, she says those who are self-realized, calm, confident, they are not very many of them. Of course, and they differ greatly from members of the other two groups. These well-adjusted people are candidates for success in the activities to which they dedicate themselves. They are pleasant, sociable, and encouraging. Their endeavors are positive and always aimed at the common good, the progress of all. Their leadership is enriching, creative, and dignified. This group produces promoters of social development, examples of sacrifice, creative geniuses, seekers of the truth. So we have these three types that exist out there. Now you might be saying, well, Kirsten, there's only three types. No, of course, there's a lot of gray area. You might have some of these tendencies and some of the other ones. But just for us to think about, for us to put into context of what she's talking about here, because research does talk about individuals who do not do well socially, who are angry with life, who do not accept their circumstances, or who just blame everyone else for their circumstances instead of taking the initiative. They don't tend to do well statistically. Now remember, we are not a statistic, we are human beings. We will always look at things from a statistical standpoint, and I truly believe, as I've stated many times before, after having taken my statistics class, I think I took it in 2017, we will forever believe that God works in probability. If you learn about how probability works, it just makes sense that things, the way that life works and how things get planned out is through probability. Like let's not get too wildly into that, but just as a side note. So the three types. She goes on to say the following, and this is backed up by science we're going to share, that studies have probed the proximate causes of these behaviors and have found the family group to be at their root. The proximate causes. So not 100%, but the proximate causes of these behaviors, whether they are codependent, disgruntled, and what was the last one, folks? Well-adjusted. It all comes down to the family group. With slight variations involving those who overcome negative factors and become well-adjusted, as well as others who, in spite of worthy support, lose their way, the home accounts for the future happiness or misery of the offspring, creating both good and bad individuals. So she's reminding us there are exceptions where people can overcome their situation and they can be resilient. There's a lot of research 5-10 years ago about resiliency in children. So there is proof of that. We can be resilient. We can overcome and be successful in spite of our struggles. Likewise, there are people that have everything given to them, every opportunity laid at their feet, and still they fall. So aside from those, what do we call them? exceptions. There's another mathematical statistical term. I can't recall it, but aside from those, the home accounts for the future. The home is where we are imprinting on our children. Joanna says, I'm not saying it. For the future happiness or misery of the offspring, creating both good and bad individuals. Good and bad, using that term loosely because we don't have another term to use. Those, again, this is all from Joanna, those who do not receive love do not know how to give love because they have none to give. In the infancy of the body, the incarnate spirit instills in its conscience the range of values that will guide its existence. Depending on how it is treated, it will follow the same direction and will pay it back in kind. Thus, self-esteem develops when the incarnate spirit is oriented toward meaningful discoveries about life, its own possibilities, the latent qualities that must be developed. Challenges are seen as invitations to strive, to toil for progress, to achieve goals. Failure neither phases nor discourages it because it teaches it what not to do. When we instill these things in our children or those whom we have guardianship over, those whom we are around, minds that are still very receptive, when we orient them toward meaningful discoveries about life, possibilities, and the latent qualities that can be developed, they can overcome any challenge, and they will take it as an opportunity for growth, and failure will not faze them. That's just us paraphrasing Joanna. Which brings us to when we talk about meaningful discoveries about life and its own possibilities. Of course, we're thinking about, wow, what we do here at the SSB as well. Not just what we do at home, but how are we affecting the lives of the children that come here to the Spiritist Society of Baltimore? And our children at home. What are we teaching them? Of course, here at the SSB and at home, we teach them about God, about Jesus. And for the sake of research, they differentiate spirituality and religion. So they found that families that were more engaged in attending a religious meeting or religion in general did a lot better, were more successful in life. And they had these good relationships. They ate families that, as you can see here. So I don't know if everyone can see the colors. So the green, let's start with the blue. The blue is seldom or never attend their religious meetings. 41%, the purple is the attend monthly to a few times a year, and the green is attending weekly or more. So if you notice, just by looking at the green, families with activities with children by religious attendants who went to meetings, religious meetings with their children, ate dinner together daily, more often, did household chores together at least weekly, and went out to movies, museums, and other family-like events more often. And the percentages were lower. They coincided with how often they went to their religious meetings. It's just something for us to think about. There is a ton of research that's out there. Whether you're Jewish or you're Christian or you're Muslim or you're any other religious affiliation, it has shown this. And Joanna reminds us of this in this chapter, of these things that are so important in childhood. And so many of us as adults who have an inner child that needs healing is because we lacked these experiences of affection, love, and tenderness in childhood, alongside respect for the child, are fundamental for a healthy, wholesome life. Now, as we were reading and studying this past few months, and especially reflecting this past couple of weeks and this past week, admittedly, we had to sit down one of our children and say, hey, we did an inventory of some things and behaviors that we've done as a parent, and they were wrong. They were just wrong, missed the mark. They were missed opportunities, can't get them back. And we saw as we were relating this to our child, who's an adult, the look of joy on their face. I didn't understand the joyful look, but then I began to understand, because it's validation to say, all those times you felt some negative emotions, you were right. I wasn't in the right. And we share this why? Not to say that we are good, the opposite, to say that we are so far from achieving all of this, that we are just like students, like everybody else, constantly having to remind ourselves, because oftentimes we are just reliving our own traumas from our childhood instead of creating healthier and new cycles for our children. So affection, love, and tenderness, and respect for the child. Respect was unheard of for children when I grew up. We didn't get respect. And I say that with all the love of my heart for my parents. I absolutely love them, and my late father, absolutely. They did their best, and I'm forever grateful that they brought me Spiritism. We share this because nobody's perfect. Affection, love, and tenderness and respect in certain cultures and certain decades, the idea of children was speak when spoken to. So the perspective on how we looked at children, it has changed, I would say, drastically. Sometimes it's going a little too crazy the other end of the spectrum now, but also to show respect, to be kind and loving. But what is the reality? Do we always hit the mark? Has anyone always hit the mark? Has any parent that you know of, you don't even have to talk about yourself, anybody that you know always hit the mark, like always did things correct all the time, 100%? No. So naturally, we haven't either. That's why we always say there's an important word, there's an important two-word sentence that is so imperative as parents, as guardians, that we learn in our vocabulary and that we practice it so it's a lot easier to say. Does anybody know what those two words are? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry because I recognize, and who was it that spoke last week? Oh my gosh. Alba? No. It was virtual. Was it virtual? I don't remember. One of the talks recently, somebody was talking about repentance. Leo, I think it was you. Repentance and the necessity to first acknowledge where we have done wrong is that first step in the healing process. It's important because throughout history there hasn't always been words that are easy to say. And Joanna reminds us that everyone needs security on the transient, unstable, incarnate journey. Children need it, teenagers need it, adults need it. I was at a Panera Bread recently getting some coffee, and I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but it was just, within earshot. I saw a mother and daughter The daughter looked like she was probably in high school, but give or take. And I heard the daughter complaining to the mother saying, oh, this and that friend, they're distancing themselves from me. I feel like, I don't have friends this semester. I feel like it's just like I'm starting high school all over again, or I'm starting school all over again. And I just feel like I'm alone. Like I don't belong. And it was palpable, like hearing it. Like it just broke my heart hearing that this, teenager expressed this to her, what I assume was her mother. And then the most beautiful thing came out of that mother's mouth. And she said, you know what? She said her daughter's name. Let's call her Lori. You know what, Lori? You might experience that throughout your life, but I want you to know that you will always belong to my tribe. You will always be part of our family. You'll always belong with us. Even if the world discards you. And I could kind of see the daughter, and she just got quiet. And I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see if she had tears in her eyes. But I imagine some tears were welding up in her eyes because she got quiet for a good 30 seconds, and she just stared at her, what I assume to be her mother. And that touches deep, to be reminded. It is that security in this unstable world that we live in, that we still have our tribe. And parents and educators and adults in general are models for the child who will love and copy them or loathe and unconsciously embody them. And this is interesting because when we learn to love our parents, honor them, instead of hating them, we're able to distinguish between largely their negative habits or downfalls and appreciate them for who they were and what they brought, being grateful for allowing us to be born and whatnot. But then there are people that really hate their parents. They loathe them. They despise them. And what's interesting in the world of psychology is that when those children, even when we grow up and we really hate our parents, we unconsciously embody them. We begin to take on their traits. That which we do not acknowledge will go into our unconscious, because we learn, since children, we learn habits and behaviors from those around us. So you might grow up thinking, oh, I hate that my parent is this way, who does this and does X. And recently we were talking to a patient, and he was recounting the story of, just briefly, I don't have a lot of time here, he's briefly recounting the story of his relationship with his mother, and he was in his, I guess, 40s or 50s, and recounting how much I won't use the colorful words that he used, but how much he disliked his biological mother. And everything about her, and all the ways, everything that she did, and how X, Y, Z, and all the ways she was bad, and all the things she did. And then he shared, at the very end of our conversation, he said, oh, but you know what's funny? My partner turned to me the other day after an argument. She turned to me and said, man, you act just like your mother. And he said, that stung so bad. He said, Miss Kirsten, that hurt like insert other colorful words. He said, but I think she's right. And remembering that and studying this, the light bulb went off. One more reason why we should make peace. Find peace in ourselves. And we're going to talk about that towards the end. Joanna, of course, she reminds us that it's true. We don't always reincarnate into the home that we want, that's idealistic, that's perfect, but we reincarnate into a home that we need to in order to evolve. But and we really appreciate this but from Joanna, this does not give any parent the right to be arbitrary, because they will have to give an accounting for it to the cosmic conscious as well as their own. Meaning, yes, we are born into the family, we need to grow, but that doesn't mean that's a free card for parents to do whatever. Well, you're meant to be with me, I'm just going to do whatever. No. Joanna says, no, that's not the case. We come back together in the family unit to try to rehabilitate, learn to love, find peace, make peace. She goes on to say that the spirit reincarnates to progress by developing and improving the skills that sleep in its unconscious. Early childhood education plays a fundamentally important role for its behavior throughout life. And we made this a different color on purpose to highlight it, how important. And we do not believe that Joanna is just speaking about education when we send our kids to school, but the education that they can only learn from their parents, their moral education as well, plays a fundamental role for our behavior throughout life. With rare exceptions, the great figures of humanity possessed great behavioral awareness based on what was learned at home. And on the care of parents and grandparents, talking about family, we learned at home on the care of parents. On the care of parents, grandparents, and teachers. It's a family moment. With rare exceptions, there are great figures in humanity who possess great behavioral awareness based on what they learned at home and on the care of parents, grandparents, and teachers who became examples worthy of emulation. Their reminiscences were rich in beauty, kindness, and love, which made them strong for the grand endeavors of existence. And those who were victims of supreme sacrifice were at peace for having died to benefit posterity. And we've already shared this, that when we have the village to help us to raise our children, village that is positive, good, uplifting, supportive, loving, respectful, we're more successful. And Joanna gives us this tidbit in the book Family Constellation, a book different from what we're reading, but nonetheless important. She says the following about children: by observing the alienated behavior of the child, after duly seeking the help of medical science, never forget the spiritual contribution in the form of passes and magnetized water, kindness towards the incarnate patient, and compassion for the persecutor. So as parents, as guardians, as teachers, educators, by observing the alienated behavior of the child after get them medical assistance to get spiritual contribution. We and this is kindness. And when she says compassion for the persecutor, it could be incarnate or discarnate. For the now sick individuals bear the marks of the suffering from which he was a victim of by following the path of revenge instead of using life's lessons to ascend to the realms of light through forgiveness. As long as the spirit does not forgive the offenses which he was subjected to, he has no means of forgiving his own being for the insanity and mistakes in which he has indulged himself. That's why it's so important for us to learn to embody forgiveness, to give the gift of forgiveness to others, because if we cannot forgive others, we cannot forgive our own selves. And we need self-forgiveness because we have not had a trajectory in our many lifetimes. We can rest assured where we've done things that if we had a special glass to look back, we would feel really bad. And in the book, Memoirs of a Suicide, we were rereading a chapter where the spirit Camilo Castelo Branco was recounting his own experience through when they did regression therapy. And as he left, let's say the office, he was recounting how deeply that unraveled him. He couldn't believe what he had done in his past. But it gave him explanation as to why he had suffered in his recent life and subsequently took his own life. He was a famous writer in Brazil that towards the end of his life, Portugal, thank you. What did I say? Brazil? He was a famous Portuguese writer, and when he became in his later years of life, let's say in his 50s, he became blind, and he did not accept that situation, and he thus soon at some point in his older years, he took his own life. He cut his life short. But he learned through regression. So he began to realize he needed to learn how to forgive himself. And that began his journey of, wow, I need to really forgive what I've done, because looking back, it's horrible. So this is why it's important when people say, oh, I don't want to give that person my forgiveness. It's not about giving it to them. Forgiveness is a gift we give to ourselves because we disconnect our negative energy from those people. So highlight from this: medical science, spiritual passes, magnetized water, otherwise known as coming to the Spiritist Center, or to your own religious meeting, whatever it is, never forgetting to involve medical science as well. And these are some final thoughts that we take away from Joanna's message. That ultimately it's about the family unit, that every person that lives on this earth has some form of trauma, whether extremely minor or major, somewhere in that spectrum. And many have very valid reasons to not love their parents, whether their parents are deceased or alive, and continuously, if they feel their parents continue to be toxic. It's a new term now, right? The gospel teaches us this: honor thy father and thy mother. What's interesting about when you honor someone, it does not mean you must like them, agree with their lifestyle, but it means that we sit in a space of gratitude for them allowing us to come to this physical life. That alone is enough for us to carry immense and nothing but gratitude for the rest of our lives. Because it's in this lifetime that we are given an opportunity to grow, to learn, to love, to re-encounter those that we loved, and to do better. Without that opportunity that our father or our physical mother gave to us in her womb, we would not exist. In this is where you find healing. When people talk about the work they do on healing their inner child, this is the gateway. Honor thy father and thy mother. This is also a good way to measure and know how successful your relationships will be. As my mother used to tell us when we were teenagers, if you want to pick a good partner for yourself, look at how the boy you're interested in treats his mother. If he's a good son, he'll be good to you. If he's a bad son, it's likely your chances are low. And it never was about look for those who have a perfect family, because that's unrealistic. It doesn't happen, doesn't exist. But look for those who at least respect, honor. Because the gospel and Jesus and the high spirits aren't just saying this because it sounds lovely, but because there is science behind this. We can only find peace in our lives when we learn to honor our mother and our father, even if it's just a memory, even if they were criminals against us and did criminal acts, to say, you know what they did was against the laws of God. They will have to attune for that one day. But I at least was here, was allowed to be born. In that is healing. In that is freedom from our sadness, from our chains. And 3 things we take away from Joanna's message. Forgiveness. Forgiveness to those who raised us and didn't always meet the mark. Forgiveness for ourselves if we haven't always hit the mark. Compassion for ourselves, for others. Education. And what does the gospel tell us? Spiritists. What is it? What's the educate yourself? Love one another and educate yourselves. That's the opposite. Thank you, Daniel. Educate yourselves, love. I really think it's not the opposite, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, it says both. The final product, thank you, Dione. Love one another, educate yourselves. These are some of the important ideas that need to be talked about more, which is sustaining family life, sustaining the family units, sustaining the cell of society, which is the family. We need to work on strengthening that. We talk about, and we've worked in healthcare now for almost 15 years and have seen millions of statistics, so many. And if you get to the bottom of a lot of these issues, at the core of issues in society and health has to do and is related to the family unit. So we would be a lot better if we work harder on emphasizing the importance of that. So thank you everyone for listening. I hope this was helpful, informative. If anyone has any comments, questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten, for this amazing presentation. We do have a question from, what's his name again? Orlando. Really interesting question.
My friend.
He says, you mentioned on inner child, what are some books and reading materials you would suggest to start working on healing one's inner child to be a more self-realized adult? And I think you already touched on it, but I would like just to put a hint on that.
Sure.
Chapter 14 of the Gospel According to Spiritism.
Mm-hmm. Chapter 14, that's good. Yeah, for sure. Hello to Orlando. Hello, my friend. There are a ton of books. I would say primarily by Joanna de Angelis, but not entirely. Those are just the ones that we have read and are familiar with. There is a book, do we have it here? Existential Conflicts is really good. Really, you go to any of Joanna de Angelis' books, they were psychographed by Divaldo Franco. They're excellent. Orlando, I have your contact so I can reach out to you more specifically when I think of other things that might be, so I can't think specifically offhand, but usually most of her books, the gospel, any of the codification, but if you want it to be real specific, Joanna has a she's known for her psychological perspective. Oh, you want me to read it? Okay. He says, also, do you know if there are any parenting styles or methods that are better than others, or books about such subjects? Not being a parent, I have no knowledge of anything like that, but I would assume there are parenting styles, methods, or tips to help us raise our children to be their best emotional selves. Also, sorry if any of these questions were off topic somehow. No, first of all, they were not off topic. They're completely on topic. And again, yeah, so I'd have to recommend either some of the work by the spirit Joanna de Angelis, or which is psychographed by Divaldo Franco, or the publications by the author Manuel Filomena de Miranda, who was also psychographed by Divaldo Franco. Also really good. May. Oh, thank you. Really good book for children too. What is that? Our Father, for kids anyway. So yeah, those are ones I can think of. Anyone can think of anything else? Alba said May. I can't think of anything else. I don't know of one specific, that a spiritist one that speaks to specific parenting styles in the usual sense that maybe modern psychology talks about it, but similar enough.
The chapter 14 that I mentioned is entitled "Honor Thy Father and Thy
The
Mother."
mother. Chapter 14, the
That
gospel.
will be directly more to parents, and it goes along with the line that you
And
just
children.
said it, which by understanding themselves, they'll be able to become a better parent.
Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned the books of Manuel Filomena de Miranda. He has a book called, always forget the title of the book, Psychological and Spirit Obsessive Disorders. Absolutely excellent for anyone who, it's not specifically about parenting, but it helps us to get to know ourselves. And gives really amazing examples. Dr. Miranda in the book, it's amazing the information that they share in that book. I've never seen it anywhere else. So yes, all the books from Joanna. Thank you, Alba. Family Constellation, Adolescence in Life. Her whole collection, as I shared, is really good. Most of her psychological, I think all her books are considered a psychological series. Okay. Well, thank you, Orlando.
Anyone here would like to make a comment or question?
Alba.
Thank you, Kirsten. Always fantastic learning from Joanna and all the psychology about the biotypes. That's the name of personalities. You mentioned somehow that, let's see, Albita is in the first group, that's it, and that's the way it is. Codependent, or I'm very irritable person, or I am a saint. So it seems like our personalities per se are a mix of the three, or at least two biotypes. I want to think the three. Is that true that we can classify ourselves like having characteristics of the different three biotypes and not fitting just in one of the groups?
I would say so. To me, that makes logical sense. When I read this, I felt the same way, because we could identify ourselves in multiple different categories. And so it's not, and I hope that these three biotypes don't constrict any of us to think, well, that's all that we are. She's just describing personality traits and types for us to recognize, acknowledge, and, well, to recognize and to work on those things. Because sometimes we live in a culture where certain behaviors are just accepted, just as what it is, but for us to be self-aware. So yeah, we can fall into many of I think there's a lot of gray area, if you will. There are extremes in society. There are people that do necessarily fit into the specific columns, but I think a lot of us also, there's just a ton of gray area where a lot of us fit into. So yeah, I hope that answers.
Anyone else? Any question? You have to have a challenging brother, right? Or a challenge brother. Anyways, nowadays we hear every now and then, social media and whatnot, perhaps, a group of friends that, going against the idea of the family, right? That is becoming obsolete, right? Or whatever it may say out there. I mean, we every now and then come across such a thing. In practical ways, and since you studied through this, I mean, what would you recommend to be? How should we act towards that idea? And obviously, those individuals that believe that the family, the cell of society, is not needed anymore.
So let me repeat your question back to you. So your question is, how do we react to people who do not believe that family is the cell of society or that it's not needed? How do we react? What's that? Showing the effects? Daniel, what were you saying? People are answering for me. Yeah. So in the Spirits book, they ask that question: what happens when family ties are relaxed? Does any society decays, chaos. And as much as we may go through a period where there will be and is a group of some individuals who want to break down the idea of family, it will not last. Because we are inherently programmed, created to be social beings. We are created to live in a family unit. So we can try to put it off, just much like in the Spirits book, it talks about, we can evolve faster or slower. It depends upon us. But pain and living in, poor decisions will not last forever. And evil does not, for lack of a better term, ignorance does not last forever. There is a time stamp on that. Because we cannot go against the very core of who we are forever. So what I would say, what do we do? Because that was your original question. What do? What we do is we live our best life. We pray for them. We wish them well. But we must live our best life. We must embody the gospel, the teachings, all of the good virtues. Do our best to reinforce our convictions, family values. Because the moment we begin to react to those people, judge them, say that they're trash, say XYZ, we're just adding fuel to the fire. We're just adding negativity to more into the world. What we need to do is reinforce. And we see a lot of that happening. We see a lot of this wave of people coming in wanting to destroy the idea of family. And there are people that are going, speaking out against it. But then there's this whole other wave of people that are not quiet, but what they're doing, they're creating new initiatives, activities for kids to strengthen families in their communities, whether by strengthening families in impoverished areas. There are groups of people that we don't even know about. You might not even hear about, but they're doing the work. It's there. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think that I would like to summarize your answer by saying one thing is being in agreement with the person. Another thing is accept the concept or the ideas of the person. So I think the Christian behavior here, since we're talking about behavior, is acceptance. We are all different. We are in different levels, but the other is completely different to be in agreement with them. So just
No, that's
Very big.
excuse me.
Right?
That's a really good point, Alba, because when we're in the moment, we might find ourselves getting triggered or getting upset. And that's something that we ourselves need to reflect on. Why are we getting upset? Because in reality, if you're at peace and truly believe, we shouldn't be necessarily upset or extremely angry. We can be, what is the word? What is the word? No, it means being angry, but it's not when you're angry, it's when you're indignant. Is the word indignant? Indignado. What? Yeah. Sorry. I had to think of Portuguese in words in English. Makes no sense. It was my parents. There you go. It's their fault. The point is for us not to get angry. We can be indignant and really dislike it. But like Alba said, completely agree. It's always healthy to say, you know what? Let's agree to disagree. Leave it at that. We don't need to focus on where we divide. We need to focus on where we come together. Oh, yes, I plan to. Yes. Oh, thank you. I plan to do that. Oh, yeah. Yes. Thank you, Alba. Alba was just saying how the family spiritist retreat is, on my watch, tomorrow. Yep. It's tomorrow. I knew that. It's tomorrow, in which we are focusing. In part, one of the reasons of doing this is bringing the family units together. Hence the term Family Spiritist Retreat. And in comes our family. So for those of you who haven't registered, you can go to the SSB website and register and pay your ticket. And if you're part of the SSB WhatsApp group, you also can find the links there. Abba, would you? Yes, it is national. Yes. Sorry I didn't add that in, guys. If those of you who aren't aware, it is something that happens nationally, but folks, since the pandemic, have created their own space locally. So many different states are doing it in their own home state in lieu of us all going together in Connecticut, how it's been that way for years and years. I think over a decade it's been that way. So it's part of a larger cell. It's honoring the family as a unit, as a cell of society. Thank you, Abba. Oh, it's 20 years. Say it again? Okay, wow. Oh, yeah, because COVID, yeah. Thank you, guys. Any last words? If not, we're going to close this out, and move to our passes. Okay, all right, everyone, thank you.